I turned 100 years old on a rainy Tuesday morning. The kind of rain that taps softly against the windows like old memories asking to come inside. I sat alone at my kitchen table with a single candle burning on a small vanilla cake I bought for myself the day before. The grocery store cashier smiled at me when she saw the candles. "Big celebration?" she asked. I smiled back and said, "Something like that." I did not tell her the truth. I did not tell her that I had spent the last 5 birthdays alone. I did not tell her that my children used to fight over who would host my birthday dinner when I was younger. Back then, the house would be full of noise, laughter, music, grandchildren running across the floor, and the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. But time changes people. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. I looked at the clock that morning, 8:30. I expected at least one phone call. Maybe my oldest son Daniel would remember. Or perhaps my daughter Emily would send flowers like she used to years ago. Nothing came. No call. No text. No knock at the door. Only silence. You learn something painful when you grow old. People do not always leave your life because they hate you. Sometimes they simply become too busy loving themselves. I blew out the candle alone. The smoke curled into the air like a disappearing prayer. Then I whispered the words I never imagined I would say. I think they forgot me. After breakfast, I walked slowly toward the living room. My knees were weak now, and every step reminded me that time collects payment from all of us eventually. I sat in my old brown chair beside the window and stared outside. Across the street, a young father was teaching his son how to ride a bicycle. The little boy kept falling, but the father never lost patience. Every time the child fell, the man picked him up again with a smile. Watching them broke something inside me. Because suddenly, I remembered my own children when they were small. I remembered Daniel running into my arms after school with scraped knees. I remembered Emily sleeping on my chest during thunderstorms because she was afraid of lightning. I remembered working double shifts at the factory so my children would never go hungry after their mother passed away. That was 52 years ago. Cancer took my wife Eleanor in 6 months. One day she was singing in the kitchen. The next day she was too weak to hold a spoon. Before she died, she grabbed my hand in that hospital room and made me promise something. "Don't let the children feel alone," she whispered. And I kept that promise. God knows I tried. I became both father and mother. I learned how to braid Emily's hair even though my fingers were clumsy. I attended every school play, every football game, every graduation. When Daniel wanted to study business in another state, I sold my truck to help pay tuition. When Emily got divorced at 34 and had nowhere to go, I emptied my savings so she and her little boy could stay afloat. I gave them everything, not because I expected something back, but because that is what parents do. We sacrifice quietly, we love endlessly, we forgive repeatedly, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Years passed, and my children became successful. Daniel built a real estate company in Chicago. Big office, expensive suits, important meetings. Emily became a corporate lawyer in Boston. Smart, strong, busy every hour of the day. At first, they still called often, then weekly, then monthly, then only on holidays. Eventually, even holidays became uncertain. I kept making excuses for them. They're busy. Life is stressful. They still love me. That is the dangerous thing about loneliness. You become an expert at defending people who abandoned you. Around noon, I checked my mailbox. Empty. No birthday cards. No letters. No photographs from the grandchildren. Nothing. I stood there for a long moment holding the empty mailbox open like maybe love would magically appear if I waited long enough. But empty things remain empty. That afternoon, my phone finally rang. My heart jumped. I hurried toward the table faster than my old legs wanted to move. But it was not my children. It was the pharmacy reminding me to refill my medication. I thanked the young woman politely anyway, because when you are old, even automated voices can sound comforting. I spent the evening looking through old photo albums. One picture stopped me cold. It was taken 30 years ago during Christmas. Daniel stood beside the fireplace wearing a ridiculous sweater his mother once knitted for him. Emily was laughing so hard she nearly spilled hot chocolate onto the carpet. And there I was in the middle of them, smiling like the richest man alive, because I was. Love made me rich once. I touched the photograph carefully. Then I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. When did I become invisible to my own family? The answer came quietly, not all at once, not with anger, but with truth. I became invisible the moment they stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as an obligation. That realization hurt more than loneliness itself. 3 days later, Daniel finally called. "Hey, Dad," he said quickly. "Sorry I missed your birthday. Work's been crazy." I smiled even though he could not see it. "That's all right, son. I'll make it up to you sometime." "Of course." Then silence. You can hear distance in someone's voice when they no longer know how to love you properly. He asked about my health for exactly 14 seconds before saying he had another meeting. Before hanging up, he added something that stayed in my mind. "By the way, Dad, have you updated the will recently?" There it was, not concern, not guilt, not affection. The will, the inheritance, the house, the savings, the things waiting for them after my funeral. I felt cold all over, not because of what he asked, but because of how naturally he asked it, as if my death had become part of his financial planning. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in my chair for nearly an hour. No television, no music, only thought. Then something happened inside me that had not happened in years. I became angry, not loud anger, not violent anger, the kind of deep heartbreak that finally grows tired of begging for crumbs of love. I thought about every missed visit, every forgotten birthday, every promise of next month, every empty chair at my dinner table. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a difficult question. What exactly are they inheriting? Or was it money, the house, my belongings? Or was it the reward for abandoning the man who gave them everything? That night, I could not sleep. Around 2 a.m, I walked into my study and opened the old wooden drawer containing my will. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the papers. Everything was divided equally between Daniel and Emily, just as it had been for years. I stared at those pages for a very long time. Then I slowly whispered words that surprised even me. "No." I sat down at the desk, picked up a pen, and for the first time in my 100 years of life, I decided things were going to change. Not happier, not younger, not less lonely, but clearer. For years, my mind had been clouded by excuses. I kept telling myself my children were busy. I kept pretending modern life had simply become too fast for family. I defended them to neighbors, church friends, even strangers. Daniel works very hard. Emily has a stressful career. They mean well, but deep down, I knew something painful had happened. My children no longer saw me as a person. I had become a responsibility waiting to disappear. That truth sat heavily on my chest as I walked slowly into the kitchen and made coffee. My hands shook slightly while pouring the cream. At 100 years old, your body moves carefully, like an old machine trying its best to keep going. I carried the cup toward the window and watched the world wake up outside. Cars rushed down the street. People hurried to jobs. A young couple argued while loading groceries into their car. Life moved quickly for everyone except the old. For us, time slows down enough to feel every silence. Around 10 that morning, someone knocked on my front door. My heart lifted for a moment. Maybe Daniel had come to surprise me. Maybe Emily felt guilty. Maybe they remembered who I was. But when I opened the door, it was my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, carrying a small casserole dish covered with foil. "I made too much food again," she said with a warm smile. "Thought you might help me get rid of it." I laughed softly. Mrs. Patterson was 82 and widowed. She understood loneliness better than most people. Sometimes I think old people recognize sadness in each other the way soldiers recognize wounds. You didn't have to do this, I told her. Yes, I did, she answered gently. Nobody should eat alone every day. That sentence nearly broke me, because a neighbor noticed my loneliness more than my own children. We sat together in the kitchen for almost an hour. We talked about ordinary things: weather, arthritis, television shows from the 1960s, her grandson graduating college. Then suddenly she asked, "When was the last time your children visited?" I looked down at my coffee. 8 months ago, I admitted quietly. She did not respond immediately. Sometimes silence is kinder than fake comfort. Finally, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "You deserve better than that." Simple words, but they hit harder than any argument ever could. After she left, I walked slowly through the house. The walls held memories everywhere. Here was the hallway where Emily learned to walk. Here was the kitchen where Daniel once burned pancakes, trying to surprise me for Father's Day. Every room carried pieces of a life I spent building for other people. And suddenly, I realized something heartbreaking. My children had moved on from these memories long ago, but I stayed behind protecting them like sacred treasures. That afternoon, I decided to call Emily myself. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. "Hi, Dad," she said quickly, distracted. I could hear keyboards clicking in the background. Am I interrupting? "I'm in the office right now." "Is everything okay?" That question stung. Not, "How are you?" Not, "I miss you." Only concern that something might be wrong. "Yes," I said softly. "Everything's fine." "Good. I've just been incredibly busy lately." "I understand." And I did understand. I understood that people make time for what matters to them. That was the painful part. I was no longer important enough to schedule into their lives. We spoke for maybe 6 minutes. Most of it involved her talking about work deadlines and travel plans. Then, just before ending the call, she said something that made my stomach tighten. "By the way, Dad, Daniel mentioned you were looking at your paperwork recently." I stayed quiet. She continued carefully. "You're not making any major decisions without talking to us first, right? Us, not family, not your children. Us. Like business partners protecting an investment." For the first time in my life, I heard fear in my daughter's voice. But it was not fear of losing me. It was fear of losing what I owned. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I did something I had avoided for years. I stopped lying to myself. My children were not worried about my loneliness. They were worried about their inheritance. That realization felt like swallowing broken glass. Because parents can survive disrespect. We can survive distance. But discovering your love has been reduced to a financial expectation that destroys something deep inside the heart. That evening, I opened an old cedar chest in my bedroom. Inside were decades of memories: Eleanor's wedding ring, old birthday cards, drawings my children made in elementary school, a tiny paper that read, "I love you, Dad, forever." Emily wrote that when she was 7 years old. I held that paper in my trembling hands and cried harder than I had cried in years. Not because I missed the little girl she used to be, but because I realized that little girl was gone. Life had replaced her with someone ambitious, successful, exhausted, and emotionally absent. The next Sunday, I went to church alone. I always sat in the 3rd row beside the aisle. It used to be a family tradition. Eleanor loved that spot because sunlight came through the stained glass windows during morning service. Now the space beside me remained empty every week. After the sermon, Father Michael approached me near the entrance. "How are you doing these days?" he asked warmly. Most people ask that question without wanting the truth, but he waited patiently. So for once, I gave an honest answer. "I think my children forgot how to love me." His expression softened. Then he said something I will never forget. "Sometimes people become so focused on building their future that they neglect the people who built theirs." That sentence stayed with me the entire drive home, because it was true. I spent my entire life building foundations beneath my children's feet. And once they stood high enough, they stopped looking down. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Daniel showed up at my house unannounced. I almost smiled when I opened the door. For one foolish second, I thought maybe he came because he missed me. But parents always know the difference between love and obligation. He wore an expensive gray coat and carried his phone in one hand the entire time. Even while hugging me, he barely looked away from the screen. "House looks good," he said while walking inside. Not, "I missed you." Not, "How have you been?" Just observations. We sat in the living room awkwardly. I offered coffee. He declined. Then finally he got to the real reason for the visit. "So Emily mentioned you've been reviewing legal paperwork." There it was again. The inheritance. I looked directly at him. "You came all this way to discuss my will." He shifted uncomfortably. "No, Dad. I'm just concerned people might take advantage of you at your age." At your age. Funny how children suddenly become experts on aging when money is involved. I nodded slowly. "And if I changed the will?" He forced a laugh. "Why would you do that?" Good question. Why would a father stop rewarding children who abandoned him? Why would a lonely old man rethink leaving everything to people who treated him like a future transaction? Daniel leaned forward. "You know, Emily and I have families, responsibilities. We're counting on stability." Counting on stability. I nearly smiled at the irony. For years, I counted on my children to remember I existed. We both ended up disappointed. I studied my son carefully. Gray hairs near his temples now, tired eyes. Expensive watch. He looked successful, but not kind. And I suddenly understood something important. Success does not always improve people. Sometimes it only reveals who they truly are. "Daniel," I asked quietly, "when was the last time you visited because you wanted to see me, not because you were worried about something?" He looked away immediately. That silence answered everything. Before leaving, he hugged me quickly near the front door. "You know we love you, Dad." I nodded politely, but his words felt rehearsed, like lines spoken out of duty instead of truth. After he drove away, I stood outside watching the empty street. Then I whispered something to myself that changed my life forever. If my money is the only thing keeping me valuable to them, then maybe they don't deserve it at all. That night, I pulled out the will again. But this time, I did not hesitate. I picked up the phone beside my desk, and I called an attorney. The attorney's office smelled like leather books and old coffee. It reminded me of places built for serious decisions. Quiet places where lives changed with signatures and truth. I sat carefully in the chair across from Mr. Howard Bennett, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed trained to notice pain people tried hiding. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the folder in front of him. "So," he said gently, "you'd like to revise your estate plan?" I nodded slowly. At 100 years old, even small movements carry weight. "Wes." He studied me carefully before speaking again. "May I ask why?" Such a simple question. But it opened a door inside me I had kept locked for years. I looked toward the window beside his desk. Outside, people walked quickly along the sidewalk carrying briefcases, coffees, shopping bags. Everyone rushing somewhere important. Then I answered quietly, "Because I spent my entire life giving everything to my children, and now I feel like I'm only worth visiting after I die." The room fell silent. Mr. Bennett did not interrupt. That's the thing about wise people. They understand that pain needs space before advice can enter. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and asked me something unexpected. "Do you want revenge?" he said softly. "Or do you want peace?" That question hit me harder than anything else, because I realized I did not truly hate my children. I still loved them. Parents never stop loving their children completely. Even after disappointment, even after abandonment, Love remains like an old scar across the heart. But love and trust are different things, and trust, once broken repeatedly, becomes difficult to rebuild. I don't want revenge, I answered honestly. I just don't want to feel used anymore. Mr. Bennett nodded slowly. Then he closed the folder and folded his hands together. Tell me about your life, he said. And for the next hour, I did. I told him about Eleanor, about losing her to cancer when the children were still young, about factory shifts that lasted 14 hours, about birthdays I missed because overtime paid for school supplies, about selling my truck so Daniel could attend college, about paying Emily's rent after her divorce, even though I barely had enough savings myself. I spoke about love the way old people often do, quietly, without expecting applause, because sacrifice becomes normal after enough years. When I finished, the attorney looked at me with sadness in his eyes. You gave them everything, he said. Yes. And what have they given you lately? I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because I could not think of a single thing. Not time, not care, not presence, not warmth, only occasional phone calls filled with hurry and distraction. Then Mr. Bennett said something that changed the direction of my life. Children are not entitled to inherit your sacrifice, he said firmly. Inheritance is a gift, not compensation for sharing your last name. I felt something loosen inside my chest. For years, I believed good parents automatically owed everything to their children forever. But maybe love should not continue rewarding neglect. Maybe kindness also requires self-respect. Mr. Bennett opened a legal pad. Tell me honestly, he asked. What matters to you now? That answer came easier than expected. I want my life to mean something before I leave this world. Not my money, not the house, my life. Because when you reach 100 years old, you begin understanding a painful truth. Most people wait too long to realize they are running out of time. I returned home that afternoon emotionally exhausted. The house greeted me with the same familiar silence. But somehow it felt different now. Not emptier, clearer. Like I was finally seeing reality without excuses covering it. I made soup for dinner and sat alone at the kitchen table. Then, suddenly, my eyes wandered toward the old family calendar hanging near the refrigerator. Birthdays were still marked on it. Daniel's, Emily's. The grandchildren, I never forgot theirs, not once. But my own 100th birthday passed almost unnoticed. I stared at that calendar for a very long time. Then quietly, I stood up and removed it from the wall. Not out of anger, out of acceptance. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Old memories kept returning like visitors refusing to leave. I remembered Daniel at age 12 crying after losing a baseball game. He buried his face in my chest and said, "I'm sorry I disappointed you, Dad." And I told him something I truly believed. You could never disappoint me just by losing. Funny how life works. Years later, he disappointed me in ways far deeper than failure. Not because he lost, but because he stopped caring. Around midnight, I walked into the living room and turned on a small lamp beside Eleanor's photograph. I still spoke to her sometimes. Widowers do that. We continue conversations long after funerals end. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, I whispered. Her smile in the photograph remained soft and patient. Then another memory surfaced. A hospital room. Her weak voice. Don't let the children feel alone. For years I honored those words. But suddenly, another thought entered my mind. Who protected me from loneliness? Who made sure I wasn't forgotten? Nobody. Not even the children I dedicated my life to raising. Tears filled my eyes. Not angry tears. The kind that come from finally accepting painful truth. The next morning, I received a call from Emily. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Daniel told me you met with an attorney. Straight to the point. No pretending. No small talk. Yes, I answered calmly. A brief silence followed. Then came the careful tone people use when trying not to sound selfish. Why just think major decisions should involve family discussion? I nearly laughed. Family discussion. Interesting phrase for people who rarely visited their father. Emily. I asked quietly, when was the last time you asked if I was lonely? Silence. Heavy silence. Finally, she sighed. Dad, you know life is complicated. No, I replied gently. Life is actually very simple. People make time for what matters to them. That upset her. I could hear it immediately. Are you trying to punish us? There it was, not sadness, not guilt. Fear. Fear that the inheritance might disappear. I closed my eyes for a moment before answering. I spent years hoping my children would visit because they loved me. Now I wonder if you only visit because you fear losing something. That's unfair. Is it? She said nothing, because sometimes silence confesses what words cannot deny. After the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling devastated, I felt free. For the first time in years, I stopped chasing affection from people unwilling to give it. And freedom, even late in life, can feel revolutionary. A week later, I returned to Mr. Bennett's office. This time, I carried something important with me. A notebook. Inside were pages filled with names, memories, and ideas. The attorney looked curious. What's this? I smiled faintly. A list of people who showed me kindness when my own family forgot me. Mrs. Patterson, Father Michael, the grocery store cashier who always helped carry my bags, the young mailman who checked on me during snowstorms, the church food pantry, the veterans' shelter downtown, people who gave me dignity without expecting reward. Mr. Bennett slowly flipped through the pages. Then he looked at me carefully. You've already made your decision, haven't you? I nodded. Yes. For the first time in years, my voice carried certainty instead of sadness, because I finally understood something powerful. Love should be appreciated while people are alive, not rewarded after they are gone. The attorney prepared the new documents quietly while I watched sunlight move across the office floor. When everything was ready, he placed the papers in front of me. My hands trembled slightly as I held the pen. One signature. That was all it would take. One signature to change everything my children expected. One signature to close a chapter of silent heartbreak. Before signing, I asked Mr. Bennett one final question. Do people usually regret decisions like this? He thought carefully before answering. The people who regret it most, he said softly, are usually the ones who waited too long to stand up for themselves. I looked down at the papers. Then slowly, I signed my name. 3 days after signing the new will, my phone would not stop ringing. First Daniel called, then Emily, then Daniel again. Then messages started appearing one after another. Dad, please call us. We need to talk. Why would you do this? Funny how quickly silence disappears when money does. For nearly a year, I could barely get a 10-minute conversation from my children. But now suddenly, both of them had time. All because they discovered their inheritance was no longer guaranteed. I sat quietly in my living room staring at the phone vibrating on the table. A strange sadness settled over me. Not satisfaction, not victory. Sadness. Because deep down I realized something painful. The fastest way to bring my children back into my life was threatening what they expected to receive after my death. Not loneliness. Not old age. Not love. Money. I finally answered Daniel's call late that evening. Dad? He said immediately, breathing heavily. Emily told me what happened. Please tell me this is some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding. A long silence followed. You actually changed the will. Les, why? That question almost made me laugh. Why? As if years of neglect had no consequences. As if fathers were supposed to wait quietly in empty houses forever while their children remembered them only during estate discussions. I spoke calmly. Because I realized something important, Daniel. You both became very interested in me the moment my money became uncertain. That's not fair. It's true. No, Dad, you're emotional right now. Emotional. That word angered me more than I expected. All my life, people praised my sacrifices when they benefited from them. But the moment I made a decision for myself, suddenly I was just an emotional old man. I may be 100 years old, I said firmly, but I'm not confused. His voice softened slightly. We love you. I closed my eyes. Then why did I spend my 100th birthday alone? Silence. Again. Always silence when truth entered the room. Finally, he whispered, I'm sorry. And for a moment, I almost broke, because every parent waits for those words. We wait years sometimes, hoping our children will finally understand the pain they caused. But something inside me stopped trusting apologies that only appear after consequences arrive. I needed you before the world changed, I told him quietly. Not after. The next afternoon, both Daniel and Emily arrived at my house together. First time in nearly 2 years. I watched from the window as they stepped out of their expensive cars wearing worried expressions. They looked older now. Life had marked their faces the same way it marked mine. But unlike me, they still had time left to repair their mistakes. I opened the door slowly before they could knock. For a brief second, nobody spoke. Then Emily suddenly hugged me tightly. Too tightly, like someone trying to erase guilt physically. Dad, she whispered, please don't do this. Not how are you? Not we missed you. Please don't do this. The inheritance again. Even her hug carried desperation instead of affection. We sat in the living room awkwardly. The same living room where they once opened Christmas presents as children. The same room filled with laughter decades ago. Now it felt like a courtroom. Daniel leaned forward first. We know you're upset. I'm not upset, I corrected gently. I'm hurt. There's a difference. Anger burns loudly. Hurt becomes quiet after enough years. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You have to understand how busy our lives became. I nodded slowly. I understand perfectly. But tell me something honestly. Did either of you ever stop and imagine what my days looked like here alone? Neither answered. So I continued. Do you know what loneliness sounds like at 100 years old? Their faces lowered toward the floor. It sounds like eating dinner in silence every night. My voice trembled slightly now. It sounds like sitting beside the window waiting for headlights that never stop in your driveway. I looked directly at them. It sounds like celebrating your 100th birthday with a grocery store cake and no family. Emily began crying quietly, but Daniel still seemed defensive. We didn't abandon you. No, I asked softly. Then what would you call it? Another silence. Painful, heavy, necessary. I stood slowly from my chair and walked toward the bookshelf near the fireplace. Then I picked up an old photo album and placed it on the table. Look, I said. They opened it carefully. Page after page of memories. Family vacations, school graduations, birthday parties, camping trips. Their mother smiling beside them before cancer stole her away. Daniel swallowed hard while staring at one photograph. He was maybe 9 years old in the picture, asleep on my shoulder during a road trip. You used to need me, I whispered. Emily wiped tears from her face. We still do. I shook my head gently. No, you need what I leave behind. That sentence shattered the room. Emily cried openly now. Daniel stared toward the window with red eyes. For the first time since arriving, neither spoke about the will again. Instead, something unexpected happened. The masks finally began falling away. Emily looked at me with trembling lips. I didn't realize how bad it had become. That hurt too, because it meant my suffering never even crossed her mind. Daniel rubbed his face tiredly. I kept thinking I'd visit next month. Then work happened. Then travel. Then life. Less, I interrupted quietly. Life. That dangerous word people use while neglecting those who love them. I sat back down slowly. My children, I said softly. I spent decades believing that if I loved you enough, you would always remember me. Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks again. But love without presence. I continued, slowly turns into grief. Nobody moved. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. Then something happened I never expected. Daniel started crying. Not politely, not quietly, real crying. The kind grown men do only when something finally breaks inside them. I thought there would always be more time, he whispered. And there it was. The tragedy of modern families. Everybody assumes love can be postponed, calls delayed, visits rescheduled, parents taken for granted, until suddenly age becomes real, and time runs out. I looked at my son crying in front of me, and suddenly I no longer saw the successful businessman. I saw the little boy who once held my hand crossing the street, the little boy who cried after nightmares, the little boy whose mother died too early. And for the first time in years, my anger softened. Not disappeared, softened. Emily moved closer beside my chair. "What can we do now?" she whispered. That question mattered, because true regret asks how to repair damage, not how to avoid consequences. I looked at both of them carefully before answering. "You can start by understanding something." They waited silently. My greatest pain was never growing old. I swallowed hard. I was feeling forgotten while I was still alive. Emily covered her mouth, crying. Daniel stared downward, unable to speak. Then I told them the truth they needed to hear. I changed the will because I needed to protect what little dignity I had left. Neither argued, because deep down they knew I was right. Night slowly fell outside while we continued talking for hours. Real talking, not rushed conversations between meetings, not distracted phone calls. For the first time in years, my children listened. Truly listened. I told them about the empty birthdays, the lonely holidays, the nights I pretended not to care, the fear of dying alone in this house unnoticed for days. Emily cried harder hearing that. Daniel finally whispered, "I'm ashamed of myself." And maybe he truly was. But healing complicated wounds takes more than guilt. It takes change. Before leaving that night, Emily hugged me again. This time differently. Softer. Longer. Real. Daniel stood quietly near the door before speaking. "Dad, is there any way to fix this?" I looked at my son for a very long moment. Then I answered honestly, "I don't know yet." Because forgiveness is not a switch. Especially when loneliness lasted years. They left together around midnight. I stood at the doorway watching their cars disappear into darkness. Then the house became silent again, but not the same silence as before. This silence carried something new. Truth. After that night, everything changed. Not instantly, not perfectly, but slowly, like sunlight returning after a long winter. For the first time in years, my phone began ringing regularly. Not because lawyers were involved. Not because paperwork needed signing, but because my children finally understood something people often learn too late. Time is the one inheritance money can never replace. The following Sunday, Daniel came to church with me. I cannot describe how strange that felt. The last time we sat beside each other in church, his hair was still brown and my knees still worked properly. Now both of us moved slower, both carrying invisible weight. As we entered the building, Father Michael smiled warmly when he saw us together. "Look at this," he said softly. "Some prayers take longer than others." Daniel looked embarrassed, but I simply smiled. During the sermon, I noticed something unusual. My son kept glancing toward me, not impatiently, not distracted, almost carefully, like he was suddenly aware that I would not be here forever. That realization changes people when it finally reaches the heart. After church, we went to a small diner nearby. Daniel helped me into the booth before sitting across from me. Then he did something he had not done in years. He put his phone away. Completely away. No checking messages. No answering emails. No rushing. Just presence. Younger people do not understand how meaningful presence becomes when you are old. At 100 years old, attention feels more valuable than money. Over coffee and eggs, Daniel finally spoke honestly. I became the kind of man I promised myself I'd never become. I looked at him quietly. "When your mother died," he continued. I watched you sacrifice everything for us. I thought success meant making sure my own family never struggled financially. I nodded slowly. That's understandable. But somewhere along the way, he whispered, I started treating people like appointments instead of relationships. That sentence stayed with me, because modern life trains people to schedule everything except love. Emily changed too. She began visiting almost every weekend. At first, the visits felt uncomfortable. Too much guilt sitting between us. Too many years left unspoken. But healing begins awkwardly sometimes. One afternoon, she stood in my kitchen washing dishes after lunch when she suddenly started crying. I keep remembering all the times you helped me, she said softly. And I can't stop thinking about how absent I became when you needed me. I walked slowly toward her and placed my hand gently on her shoulder. Regret can either destroy you, I told her quietly, or teach you. She turned toward me with red eyes. Do you think I'm selfish? That question broke my heart, because I could hear the little girl she used to be hiding underneath the successful lawyer. I answered honestly, no, I think you got lost, and she did. Both my children did. The world teaches people to chase careers, status, achievements, money, faster schedules, bigger homes, endless ambition, but nobody warns them about what gets abandoned during the chase. Family dinners, phone calls, aging parents, moments that never return. Weeks passed, then months, and something beautiful slowly began happening inside this old house again. Life returned. Real life. Laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for years. Emily started bringing my grandson Oliver during visits. The boy was 16 now, tall, quiet, always staring at his phone. The first few visits felt forced. Teenagers rarely know how to connect with very old people. But one evening, he noticed my military photographs displayed beside the fireplace. You were in the Navy, he asked. I smiled. For 4 years. That single question opened a door between us. Soon he started asking about history, war, old music, how people lived before the internet. Sometimes we talked for hours. One afternoon he admitted something that stayed with me deeply. Mom always said you were strong, he told me. But I didn't know you were this interesting. Interesting. I laughed harder than I had laughed in months. Because old people do not fear wrinkles nearly as much as becoming invisible. A few weeks later, Daniel brought his daughters to visit too. The house became noisy again. Footsteps, voices, music, the smell of food cooking in the kitchen. At one point, while watching my family gathered around the dinner table, I suddenly felt overwhelmed with emotion, because for the first time in years, I no longer felt abandoned. That night after everyone left, I sat alone in the living room beside Eleanor's photograph again. Only this time, the silence felt peaceful instead of painful. I think they finally came home, I whispered softly. But life still had one final lesson waiting for all of us. 2 months later, I collapsed while watering flowers in the backyard. The doctors called it a mild heart episode. Your age makes recovery delicate, one physician explained carefully. Delicate. Funny word for standing near the edge of life itself. When I woke up in the hospital, Daniel was asleep in the chair beside my bed. Emily sat near the window holding prayer beads in trembling hands. For a moment, I simply stared at them quietly, because this was all I truly wanted. Not money, not revenge, not control, presence, love, family. Daniel woke first. His eyes filled immediately when he realized I was conscious. Dad, he whispered, and in his voice I heard genuine fear, not fear about inheritance. Fear of losing me. Emily grabbed my hand tightly. We thought we were going to lose you. I looked at both of them carefully. Then I said something important. Now you understand why time matters. And neither could speak. Tears answered for them. The hospital stay lasted 6 days, and during every single one of those days, my children stayed beside me. Not perfectly, not every minute, but faithfully. They rotated shifts, brought food, talked with doctors, held my hand during difficult nights, and slowly something healed inside all of us. Not because the past disappeared, but because love finally returned in action instead of words. On the final evening before leaving the hospital, Daniel asked quietly, "Are you still keeping the will changed?" I looked at him carefully. Then I smiled faintly. "You know something strange?" "What?" "I don't think the will matters anymore." And it didn't, because the real inheritance was never money. It was the lesson, the awakening, the painful realization that people must love each other while they still can. A few months later, I invited my entire family for dinner. Children, grandchildren, noise everywhere. At one point, Oliver asked me a question in front of everyone. "Great-grandpa," he said, "what's the most important thing you learned in 100 years?" The room became quiet. Everyone waited. I looked around the table slowly, at the faces I once feared losing forever. Then I answered honestly, "Never wait until someone is dying to show them they mattered." Silence filled the room. Emotional silence, the kind that reaches people deeply. Then Emily started crying again. Daniel lowered his head. Even the grandchildren looked thoughtful, because everybody understands truth when it arrives plainly enough. That night, after everyone left, I walked slowly through the house, turning off lights one by one. But before going to bed, I stopped near the front door. Years ago, I stood at that same door, feeling forgotten by my own family. Now the house still carried warmth from their presence. I smiled softly to myself. At 100 years old, I finally learned something unexpected. Sometimes people do not change because you beg them to. Sometimes they change when consequences force them to see what they were about to lose. And sometimes, the strongest thing an old father can do is remind his children that love should never be postponed until after the funeral. I am 100 years old now. When people hear that age, they usually ask the same questions. What's your secret? How did you live so long? What wisdom can you share? But after everything that happened with my children, I believe the most important lesson of my life has nothing to do with health, money, or even old age. It is this: the deepest loneliness in the world is not growing old. It is feeling forgotten by the people you once gave your entire life to. For years, I believed my children no longer loved me. And maybe part of that was true in a painful way. Not because they hated me, but because modern life slowly pulled their hearts away from what mattered most. They became busy chasing success, solving problems, building careers, paying bills, raising children, surviving stress. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, they stopped noticing my silence. That happens more often than people realize. Families rarely break apart in one dramatic moment. Most families drift apart quietly. One missed phone call becomes several. One canceled visit becomes a year. One forgotten birthday becomes emotional distance so large that nobody knows how to cross it anymore. And the frightening part is this: sometimes nobody notices the damage until almost too late. I changed my will because I was hurt. That is the truth. Not because I stopped loving my children. Not because I wanted revenge. But because I finally reached a point where I could no longer ignore my own pain. At 100 years old, I realized something many people never learn: love without respect slowly destroys the soul. For too long, I accepted crumbs of attention while pretending it was enough. I defended absence. I excused neglect. I kept lowering my expectations because I was afraid of losing the little connection we still had. But eventually, even the softest heart grows tired of being invisible. And when my children suddenly returned after learning about the inheritance, I faced a difficult truth. Money got their attention faster than loneliness ever did. That realization shattered me. But strangely enough, it also saved our family. Because for the first time in years, honesty entered the room. No pretending. No polite excuses. No hiding behind busy schedules. Just truth. Painful truth. And sometimes painful truth becomes the beginning of healing. I do not know how many days I still have left in this world. At 100 years old, tomorrow is never guaranteed. My hands shake more now. Walking takes effort. Some mornings my body feels tired before the day even begins. But my heart feels lighter than it did a year ago, because my children finally came back emotionally, not just physically, not perfectly. No family is perfect. There are still moments of guilt, sadness, regret. Some wounds heal slowly. Some memories still hurt when I sit alone at night thinking about the years we lost. But now they call because they want to hear my voice. Now they visit without discussing paperwork. Now my grandchildren know my stories. Now laughter lives in this house again. And perhaps most importantly, now my children understand that parents are not permanent. One day the chair at the dinner table becomes empty forever. One day the voice on the phone disappears. One day the person who sacrificed everything for you quietly leaves this world. And no inheritance on earth can buy back one extra conversation after that happens. If you are listening to my story right now, I want to ask you something from the deepest part of my heart. When was the last time you truly checked on your parents? Not a rushed text. Not a quick holiday greeting. Not a distracted conversation while scrolling your phone. I mean, truly checked on them. Sat beside them. Listened to them. Asked them if they are lonely. Asked them what they fear. Asked them what memories still live inside their hearts. Because one day, you may discover they spent years hiding pain just to avoid becoming a burden to you. Old people do that. We become quieter about our suffering as we age, not because it hurts less, but because we fear nobody has time to hear it. And if your parents are already gone, then remember this lesson for the people still alive around you now. Your spouse, your children, your grandparents, your friends. Love them while they can still feel it. Do not wait for funerals to express affection. Do not wait for hospital rooms to create memories. Do not wait until guilt becomes heavier than pride. Life moves frighteningly fast. One moment you are holding your child's hand crossing the street. The next moment you are standing at the window, wondering why they stopped coming home. And to every parent listening to me right now, please hear this carefully. Your value does not disappear simply because your children became too distracted to notice it. Your life mattered before money. Your heart mattered before inheritance. Your presence mattered long before anyone started discussing what happens after your death. Do not spend your final years begging for scraps of attention from people unwilling to appreciate you. Love your family deeply. Forgive when possible, but never forget your own dignity in the process. Because kindness should not require self-erasure. In the end, I discovered something beautiful hidden inside all this heartbreak. The real inheritance was never the house, never the savings, never the will. The real inheritance was the lesson my children finally learned, that time is precious, that love requires presence, that family cannot survive on intentions alone, and that one day, all the money in the world becomes worthless compared to one more hour with the people you failed to cherish soon enough. Tonight, as I sit beside the same window where I once cried from loneliness, I no longer wait for headlights with sadness in my chest. Now I wait with peace, because sometimes families lose their way, but sometimes love finds its path home again just before the light goes out